I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. For over 125 years, the Petaluma Women's Club has been responsive to the times, and here we are, using a Zoom platform. This speaker series of the Petaluma Women's Club was conceived as an opportunity to share our historic clubhouse with the community while learning from amazing local women leaders. Perhaps at no other time have we all felt the need to be joined by positive good, and tonight you'll see that we have the perfect guest speakers. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to explain a couple of elements of the program. Peggy and Sue will answer questions after their presentation. Please submit any questions you might have through the Zoom chat function at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording the presentation tonight, and it will be posted on the Petaluma Women's Club website. And Peggy and Sue will also make sure to share it with you. Since the mid-1800s, Sonoma and Marin's dairy belts have been renowned. Our rich soil, diverse grasslands, and mild coastal climate create an ideal setting for dairy farming. Many farmers were early environmentalists with commitments to sound agricultural practices. The North Bay has become a culinary powerhouse, a community of mission-driven, family-owned and operated farms and ranches where food and wine lovers, chefs, and cheesemakers flourish. This is the place where Peggy Smith and Sue Conley chose to establish the Tamales Bay Foods Group and Cowgirl Creamery. It is a special treat to introduce our speakers today. Peggy was raised in Northern Virginia, and Sue not far away in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. It was a road trip after graduation that led them to the Bay Area. After taking classes at the San Francisco City College restaurant program, Sue worked at several Bay Area restaurants before starting Bette's Oceanview Diner in Berkeley. Bette's bought directly from farmers and made everything by hand. Sue stayed at Bette's for 11 years before moving to Point Reyes. In the early years, Peggy had her sights set on working at Chez Panisse with Chef Alice Waters. When Chez Panisse opened their cafe in 1980, Peggy got her chance and stayed there for the next 17 years before Sue pulled her away with an idea for a cheese company. And what an idea that was. Let's enjoy hearing more about the adventures of Petaluma's two amazing chefs and artisan cheesemakers, Peggy Smith and Sue Conley.
Thank you, Colleen. It's really nice to be here, and I appreciate that you asked us to be here. And Sue was going to start us off by just talking a little bit about how we came to San Francisco Bay Area initially, and then how we ended up here in Petaluma happily.
Well, I'm not going to tell that whole story, but I will say that we were interested in cooking professionally in our college years in Tennessee, but we were working at really simple places. We didn't have our sights on fine cuisine at all. But it was a time in the late 70s and early 1980s when women were starting to make inroads in restaurant kitchens. Here in Berkeley, it was Alice Waters who was making a new spirit in the kitchen, and that was one of collaboration. And her kitchen had many women chefs, including her sous chef, and then Peggy was one of the first chefs in the cafe with Janet Fletcher and several characters. Joyce Goldstein was in that kitchen. people that went on to really change the way we eat. So I just wanted to start there because I think that it's hard to imagine that women weren't invited to cook professionally in those times. It was a man's kitchen, and you might get a job as a salad pantry cook or pastry, but you know, there wasn't a serious mentorship for leaders in the kitchen. We didn't really think that we didn't set out in our 1967 baby blue Chevy 3-on-a-tree van to explore the culinary world in the United States. We just wanted to see the States and understand what America is all about. So we saved up money and we bought that van and traveled for 6 months across the United States, learning. It was the bicentennial year, 1976. So there were many celebrations on the founding of the country and many women-oriented celebrations of crafts and culture. So it was really a mind-expanding trip. And when we landed in San Francisco, well, Peggy, you take it from there.
Well, we came to San Francisco. We'd been up to Oregon visiting some friends in Eugene, and we came down to San Francisco, and it was the 4th of July. And fortunately, we found ourselves at Dolores Park, where the San Francisco Mime Troupe was celebrating the 4th of July. And the difference between our celebrations that we'd been accustomed to in Washington, D.C., where you go on the mall and fireworks aplenty and, you know, things are really happening there. This was more of a gathering of people that were enjoying the San Francisco Mime Troupe, which is, you know, an alternative mime group. And it was just really fun and it excited us. There was so much energy in the air. And so we decided that we would move, and we did come here, and it was very hard to get jobs. It was during a recession, and I did get some jobs at a office building. I actually worked at Levi Strauss, and Sue worked at a small deli in Embarcadero 1, and we just knew that I couldn't really work in an office very well, that office environment. So we started cooking, and we were very studious about how we approached it. We read tons of cookbooks, Dion Lucas, Julia Child, Madeline Kamen, on and on, Jacques Pepin, and really learned about techniques and worked in various kitchens. Sue went to the City College of San Francisco in the cooking school. And I worked in a few restaurants in San Francisco, all the while. For about a year, I would go over every week to Chez Panisse when it was only the downstairs, and I'd turn in my resume and they'd say, "We'll come back." Come back again, maybe we'll find something. So in 1980, when they opened the cafe, that's when, as Colleen said, I got my job there. But the value that we had in working in those restaurants at Bette's Oceanview Diner and at Chez Panisse was really about, as Sue said, it was about collaboration, but it was also about ingredients. And we all focused really steadfastly on trying to work with farmers and producers to get the best ingredients that we possibly could. There were ingredients that we knew were around in Europe, in France, in Italy, and so we'd encourage people to get seeds to grow some of those things or raise different heritage breeds, and we were able to support them in their endeavor. And through doing that, it really helped raise the consciousness of the different growers. We were able to work with people like Warren Weber, who has Star Route Farm in Bolinas. He had it. It's still in operation. Peter Martinelli worked with Nyman Shell when they first started out. And anyway, there was the opportunity for farmers to expand their knowledge and for us to expand what we were able to work with. Would you say so?
Yeah, and it also was a time when places like Acme Bread, which was started by Steve Sullivan, a cook at Chez Panisse, he started that. And, you know, the cheese board across the street was bringing in really interesting cheeses from Europe, not so much the United States. That was slower. The cheese making world was slower to evolve. But there was beer makers, you know, just all kinds of interest in making good food instead of importing it.
Yeah.
Also, there were a lot of co-ops and people were buying rice in bulk and that sort of thing. So a consciousness about food, nutrition, and flavor. So Chez Panisse really made it beautiful. It went from brown food to beautiful food in that kitchen. And so people like me and Bette, we mimicked that style in a everyday casual restaurant. But that influence was found across the country. You know, there was Susan Spicer in New Orleans, the first woman chef in the French Quarter, and there was many in New York and Boston that were part of this movement that was about good cooking, but also about connection to the farms and buying mindfully the ingredients. So then what happened, Peg?
Well, you know, we were really lucky and we made some really great contacts in Napa Valley, and, you know, Axel Fabre at Mondavi started a presentation that she had where she imported these French chefs, René Verdon, Paul Bocuse, the Trois Gros, people that were very well known in the 70s and 80s, and I think probably a lot of you all know who I'm talking about. But then the California wine vintners would go to Bordeaux every other year for Vinexpo, which is a huge event where vintners from around the world come and they showcase their wines, and of course buyers come to make their orders, and it happens in June every other year. And the California vintners sponsored a restaurant, and luckily I was asked to be the chef of this California Grill is what it was called. And we did it, I think I did it maybe nine times. So it was an 18-year period. But what this gave us an opportunity to do was to travel to France, to cook there, to work with those ingredients. But of course, we took a little detour either before we got to Bordeaux or after we got to Bordeaux, and we were able to travel. And one of our main stops that we always did was we would go to London, and there's a fantastic place called Neiljar Dairy. And it's actually one of our big inspirations for what we've done. And Neiljar Dairy Randolph Hodgkins is a person that dedicated himself and his business to really promoting the traditional cheeses of the British Isles. And what had happened after the war, a lot of the, after World War II, I should say, a lot of the cheese producers started making more commodity cheeses because they really needed to have the protein and they needed to feed the people. So some of the traditional cheeses were forgotten, but Randolph went to those people that were still making these cheeses and he encouraged them to continue on. And so he would buy their cheese, bring it to London. They had, their original store was at Covent Gardens and it's still there. But he really worked with those producers. And so when we'd go to London, we were fortunate enough to go down into their aging cellar and see what they were doing, or go to a producer and see how they communicated with the people. And most importantly, how they supported those cheesemakers. They give them really good tips on feedback from what the customers were saying or how well things sold. And even if things weren't exactly right, they still supported them and they bought the cheese, always giving good feedback. So this was a huge inspiration because they had a place that they bought fresh cheese from. And they also really supported the other cheesemakers. And so it wasn't so much about them, but it was about their producers. And when we saw that, they had a wholesale business and a retail business, and they worked closely with a fresh cheese producer. And so that kind of put a little bug in our head about how a business could work that was singularly minded. I know that Chez Panisse and Bette's were singularly minded in creating restaurant food that was excellent, but this was just really narrowing in on milk and what the milk could produce and how well you could produce this and how you could service those producers and get that to market. So then, having visited them quite often and being so inspired by them, then Sue, who had moved to Point Reyes, Sue, why don't you take it from there?
Well, I just thought that it was what was needed in Point Reyes. It was needed was a way to identify the land with good milk and good cheese. And we talked to all the cheesemakers in France and the cheesemakers in England, all talked about the milk, and not only the milk, but what the cows were eating. And that's what they really wanted to hear about. They didn't want to hear the technique of how the cheese was made. It was really about the quality of the milk, the freshness, the altitude, what's in the pasture. And we realized that Point Reyes is just primo pasture land, and the climate is ideal for the health of the animals and the growth of the pasture. So that's why European immigrants came and did well out in Point Reyes. So we realized we had the milk, but nobody was making cheese in Point Reyes. So I drew a map and made it go all the way up to Sebastopol, because that's where Jennifer Bice was starting her cheese making business. And then it went even over a little bit to Sonoma, where Igvella had been making cheese for a couple of decades. And we got that group together. Bellwether Farms was just starting. They were the first sheep dairy in California, one of the few in America. Really, really innovative and hardworking. And then we pulled in Matos, which is the 6th generation Azorean cheesemakers. And with this group, we had something, you know, we had,
And Strauss.
well, Strauss wasn't making cheese yet, but
No.
we did actually. I worked most closely with Strauss as they were starting, and I peddled their butter and milk with Ellen Strauss. We drove all around San Francisco. It was really fun, into the hotels and restaurants to convince them that organic milk was the best thing to have on the table. Anyway, so we created this group. It wasn't really an organized group. It was just me and Phyllis, my friend Phyllis, who was a great salesperson. And we got the ball rolling. We worked the farmer's market. We worked at food shows. We drove around with samples and created this much needed recognition of the area as an important dairy region. And look, I brought cheeses all from Tamales Bay.
Can you send us some of those?
We next time we'll serve them, but we have about 20 cheesemakers now in our area, where when we started we had about 5. So the idea, it not only gave customers an identification for the area, but it gave dairy farmers an idea that maybe they could make some cheese too. So most of the cheesemakers today are the next generation of those multi-generation dairies in Point Reyes and Sonoma.
You know, I just have to say that one of the reasons that was so important, or is still so important, is that milk prices really flatlined maybe as early as the 80s. And the farms are still producing the milk, but the value of what they were producing hadn't increased. And so one of the reasons that people were interested in doing that is it created a secondary product that they could have come from their farm. And I have to say that the University of California Extension was really instrumental in helping to increase the amount of cheesemakers in Northern California, because they offered classes that the dairy farmers came to that talked about these secondary products. Sue, what do you call them? You don't call them secondary. I call them secondary.
Value added.
Value added, okay. That's a nicer term. The value added products, because they could take their milk and make something, which isn't easy to do, I will say, but the California Extension really did help put people on the road to doing this. And a really good example of a couple of farmers out there are the Giacomini's, who make Point Reyes Blue, which is fantastic cheese. Or there's Nicasio Cheese Company, which makes their, I think, a 5th generation Swiss dairy farming family that makes some fantastic cheese. And I could go on naming these people, but I think it really helped when a dairy family came to that meeting, the Giacomini's, and they thought about it long and hard, and it actually brought the girls, we call them the girls, but they're, you know, women that are maybe in their late 40s, back to the farm to work with their father on making the Point Reyes Blue cheese, which has been very successful. And it's made the Giacomini parents, it made them very happy that they came back to the farm. They had successful careers before. So that was an interesting addition. I will say, to add to Sue's point about, you know, we did get to work with an affineur in Bordeaux for many years, and they came to visit us when we had bought this old barn, and I think there's going to be a picture of it later, that was an old hay barn. And we bought this barn, and when we bought it, it was a dirt floor, and there were pigeons flying all around, and hay was stacked in there. And our friends from Bordeaux came, and we took them to that location. And you know, they didn't bat an eye about the dirt floor or the pigeons, because they knew it would be deconstructed and reconstructed. But what they asked, the very first thing, not like, what kind of cheese are you going to make or anything like that, but like Sue said, they said, so it looks like the cows have a really nice pastures out here. I think you can make good cheese here. And, you know, for us, that was probably the good push that we needed, because it was a big project we were taking on, and to have their support in that way really helped us along. Don't you think, Sue?
Yeah, I'm just gonna break for another story, because we have Phyllis Richmond on the screen. I don't know if everybody can see her, but she's right in the middle of my screen. Hi, Phyllis. And she was the editor of the food section of the Washington Post when Peggy and I lived in Washington, and all the way, I think she did that for 25 years or so. And it's just an amazing writer and friend and mentor. And so I'm so happy she's on the call here. And she did something amazing when we were well on our way to creating the Cowgirl Creamery vision. And Phyllis came out to do a story for Gourmet Magazine about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. And stories like that just make everything worth it. You know, what we've done is not an easy thing. You know, we've worked very hard, but to get the reward of recognition of the value of the land, the farmers, the cows, putting that all together with the final product, the cheese, really makes it meaningful. And so you all should look that story up. You could still find it online about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust. And thank you, Phyllis, for being here.
Well, I think it's important maybe really to talk a little bit about the Marin Agricultural Land Trust, because maybe not everybody knows about it, but it was something that was started by Ellen Strauss and Phyllis Faber. And the whole idea was to make sure that this land could be preserved in perpetuity as agricultural land, because at the time there was so much interest in really developing it and maybe getting rid of a lot of the farmland. So that took a long time for them to really convince people that that land is so valuable as agriculture, and you need to have open space and ag when you're near a city. Number one, so you know where your food comes from, but maybe most importantly, so you have food. And so Sue's been very well connected with the Marin Agricultural Land Trust for a long time, and we've aligned our business with we've aligned Cowgirl Creamery with the Marin Agricultural Land Trust as much as we could. And we work very closely with Strauss, and a majority of our milk comes from Strauss that we make cheese from. And we use Strauss milk specifically for certain cheeses. And we also work with Bival Dairy, which is another organic dairy in Marin. And we use their milk for other cheeses. So our cheeses, really, all the cheeses that we make, we don't blend milk from from lots of herds. There's single herd sourced milk for various cheeses. And a lot of that has to do with the components in the milk, how rich the milk is in the calcium and the proteins. And so we can see how that milk really is. We analyze the milk, and we understand what the fat content is and what the different variables are in those milks, so that we understand when we're using the milk how we need to work with it. Because milk most of the milk that we taste really tastes the same every single day. But in reality, milk really is seasonal. And anybody who's grown up on a farm probably knows that as well as I do. But spring milk is much different than winter milk. And it all has to do with what the cows, the sheep, the goats are eating at the time, and their different nutrients. Say for instance, in the spring, the pastures are really fresh and full of moisture from the rains, and so the milk is not as it's not as rich as it might be in the winter, just because of what they're eating. So being able to align ourselves with dairies that we work with and have worked with Strauss from the very first day that we opened our door, we understand that milk, and we really appreciate what both the Taylors from Bivalve and the Strausses have done with their dairies. So
I wonder if we could look at the slideshow, and then that'll kind of close out the story.
Well, there's so much more to the story, but.
Well, we haven't even started.
Oh, okay.
It's only 4 slides.
Yeah.
That's us. So, yeah, this is a picture of the Strauss dairy, and you can see the cows have an excellent view of the Tamales Bay, and really nice, cool air, and mostly green grass. This must be a summer shot.
Yeah.
The grass greens up after the first rain, and just to show the point that where the milk comes from is key to the final product. Click.
Yeah, and I will say just about that dairy that, one of the things that's really fantastic about Point Reyes or the Tamales Bay region is that they have that delightful breeze that comes off the bay and off the ocean. And so it really does, it acts as a great protectant for the animals themselves, because it really shoos a lot of the flies away. And the insects are not so much of a problem.
They're never stressed by extreme temperatures.
Right.
Except maybe this year.
Oh yeah, well, aren't we all?
So this is Maureen, who's was the head cheesemaker for many years, and this is our cottage cheese vat that we just very recently replaced in the last 5 years. But our cheese has always been handmade. We've mechanized a little bit of the packaging and tried to get the back-breaking part of it a little lighter for the cheesemakers, but it really is an artisan cheese. Mount Tam is our biggest seller by far. It's 60% or more of our sales, but we have developed some really great aged cheeses, Wagon Wheel and Hopalong. And our fresh cheeses continue to be my favorite, the cottage cheese, the fromage blanc, and creme fraiche. And that is just the pure flavor of good milk, concentrated. Click.
And I have to say that we started out with a vat that was 100 gallons, and we're in our 23rd year now, and we moved to vats that are 1,000-gallon vats, and we no longer use scooping to put the curd into the molds. We use gravity feed, which is really, that's what Sue was referring to when she said it's not as backbreaking, but it's still very much handmade. We do hand washing on several other of our cheeses. And when we did move to a new production facility on Cater Lane in Petaluma, we only make Red Hawk in Point Reyes. And what you're seeing right now is our barn in Point Reyes. But the thing about that, and maybe if we do a tasting, we can get more into it, but it's really a cheese that is it's really shows terroir, because normally if you make a wash drying cheese like Red Hawk is, you introduce this certain bacterium linen into the milk mixture when you're setting the curd. Well, before you set the curd. But this, we don't add any, and it's because of the flora of the region through the washing that it attracts this bacteria and these enzymes that really help create that cheese, because when it starts out, it's the exact same recipe as Mount Tam. But just because of those environmental influences with the washing, it creates a whole different cheese. And you would never know, tasting those two side by side, that they start out exactly the same. It's just the finish that really, and the environment that changes that cheese.
So this is a picture taken at our 10th anniversary, and all those people weren't on our salary, but all those are on our payroll, but all of those people helped in the success of the first 10 years. So it includes people like our architect, our accountant. It includes the dress shop inside our barn that's been there since day one, Susan Hayes. Members of the farmers market of Point Reyes, who got that going, along with the Marin Organic Group that had a mission. Peg and I helped start that. The mission was to identify where the food is grown and how it's grown. So with 2 words, Marin Organic, you get all of that information. And that organization was so successful that it folded a few years ago, because all of the row crop growers in Marin are certified organic, and 80% of the dairies and the other 20% of pasture is certified organic through effort by the county of Marin. So that's why I put this in, because it shows that collaborative thinking helps everyone, and that's been at the base of our business since day one, collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So what's next? Click. We did
Retail.
it into retail. So Peg, you want to talk about our retail and distribution arm?
Yeah, well, when we started, we weren't making that much cheese. We started only making fresh cheese, and the amount that we made slowly grew. And then a year and a half after we started making Mount Tam. but we couldn't really get any wholesalers to come out to Point Reyes because they thought it was too far to drive. So we decided, or buyers to come out there. So we thought, well, why don't we open a teeny little shop in San Francisco that really is one that satisfies wholesale clients so that they can come and taste all the cheeses that we sell as wholesale, because we don't only sell our own cheese, we sell all the local cheeses that are made, and we work with cheesemakers around the United States, as well as we've continued to work with Meal-Jar Dairy, and we do have some Spanish cheeses, a few Italian, and some French cheeses. So we opened a small shop that was 400 square feet, and it was on California and Fillmore Street in San Francisco. And 200 of the square feet were used for, we had to have 5 sinks, and we had a storage container, a reach-in the back. So 200 square feet, little shop. And buyers could come in there and they could try all the different cheeses, and then they could order. And since it was so hard to get people to come out to buy our cheese, we had to start our own delivery system. And so we started our wholesale business maybe a year after we started making cheese. And so this facilitated our retail. When the ferry, we also had retail in the barn. So when we opened up in Point Reyes, the idea was to show the area as an appellation of sorts, where you could get these great organic vegetables, you could buy organic cheese and other cheeses, you could get flowers. When we first started, there were some people in our building that were making fresh pasta. And so it was just a little marketplace. But we started our wholesale business when we had the artisan cheese, and they were thinking about opening up the Ferry building. They asked us if we wanted to come and work in the Ferry building. And we were delighted to do that. We were the first ones to sign the lease for the Ferry building, along with Acme Bakery and McAvoy Ranch, which is in Marin as well. And then our next adventure in retail was, we thought that we would open a shop in Washington, D.C. And so that way we could get our cheeses on the East Coast as well. And we had a shop there for, I think it was maybe
8 years.
8 years. And, you know, when we opened, it was actually during that next recession. And it was fun though. We closed after 8 years because the neighborhood we were in really developed into more of a fashion neighborhood, and not so much as a food destination neighborhood. So we decided that we just continue to concentrate in this area. And so we have the Ferry building, and we still have Point Reyes for retail. And we opened up the little sidekick at the Ferry building, which was a place that we could show people how to use different cheeses. It's really cheese-centric. And we're happy with having been able to do that.
Yes, and we also have we still run trucks. Peggy and I thought we never want to have a fleet of trucks. That sounds awful, but now we have a fleet of trucks, and we deliver to about 500 accounts, mostly restaurants in the Bay Area. That has been hugely impacted by our stoppage here, but we continue to deliver to retail stores, so things are kind of evening out. But it's really, really awful to see what's happening to our restaurant friends.
Yes, it's our restaurant friends and specialty shops are so challenged. I hope that most of them survive. I'm afraid of some of their futures.
Yeah, but we still have our trucks on the road and delivering our cheese along with the 60 producers that we represent locally and a few from Europe.
Mhm.
So that's kind of our story.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I hope you do ask us back so that we can have a more detailed talk about the cheeses that we make, because we haven't really talked much about them. And there's somebody that I see on my screen that is instrumental in helping us, has helped us get this business going, and that's Deborah Dickerson, who's got a cow behind her. When we do that, I'd love it if she could come and join us, because we've worked with Deborah for many years. She was with Neil Dairy as their sole representative in the United States for many years. And she is with Cowgirl now, and we're so happy to have her. We can't hear you. Are there any questions? Because I do, Colleen, really hope we can come back and focus on our cheese. But if there are any questions about our business or about our cheese, we're happy to answer them.
Well, you guys have given us such rich information, and frankly, I'm getting hungry listening to you. I would love to hear more specifics about the unique cheeses that you made, and I think it's, you know, I grew up around a dairy, and my uncle was a premier dairyman and veterinarian in the business years ago. And I never thought about the fact that cows would have different flavors of milk. You know, I mean, as a kid, you're so innocent and naive, but of course that makes sense. And you would be experts on that. And, you know, I watched the pasture land around our ranch, and now I'm going to have an even enhanced appreciation of the flavor of the grass around us.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's really fun to have your perspective about how our environment is affecting our lands and our landscapes, affecting the food we eat. So yes, please take some more time. Maybe you can each talk for a couple more minutes, and then we'll start catching some of the questions that are being posted.
Okay. Well, we started out making fresh cheese, and we started out making clabbered cottage cheese, fromage blanc, creme fraiche, and quark. And we made quark mostly because Mrs. Strauss was from Amsterdam, and Bill Strauss was from Hamburg, Germany, and they really couldn't find a good quark here. So Sue and Ellen were in the cheese making room, and we're continually trying to perfect the quark recipe as to Bill Strauss's specifications, though they never really accomplished what he was looking for. But our idea was, okay, let's start out, let's make fresh cheese to really showcase the milk. They're considered very simple cheeses, and I will say that cottage cheese made well is not a simple cheese to make. It's very temperamental as far as the size of the curd, how much you stir, if you stir too much, if the milk's too hot, if the wash isn't the right temperature, you can shatter the curd, which makes that real granular texture. You can overcook it. So we're still trying to perfect our cottage cheese making. But we make fromage blanc, which has required a lot of education on our part on what you can do with that. And it's basically a great format so that you can really taste the flavor of the milk. But it also gives you the opportunity to flavor it in a lot of different ways and incorporate it into a lot of different recipes as a savory or a sweet. Actually, when we were open for maybe about a couple months, somebody came from Italy, and they were really happy that we were making fromage blanc, and And we said, so, what do you think? What kind of things do you do with fromage blanc that maybe we're not thinking about? And he said, well, what we like to do at the end of a large meal is we like to take fromage blanc and we add a little bit of freshly ground espresso, and we add some of that brown granulated sugar to it and mix it all together, and it's a perfect dessert. And I thought, wow, that's really opening up ideas on how you can use fromage blanc, where you have the flavor of the milk, but you're also getting, you can really play with it to bring it along to lots of other dimensions. Well, creme fraiche is, that is such a fantastic thing to always have in your fridge, because it's really can also be sweetened in a way that is used in desserts or in savory dishes, but it's a perfect thing for as a thickening agent for sauces, or just as a complement to a soup. That's real simple. It's great on desserts to contrast the sweet and a little bit of that character that creme fraiche has, which is more of a fermented cream flavor. And then we make Mount Tam, and then Sue, I'm going to have you talk about Red Hawk. But we decided after making fresh cheese for a while that it would be good to have a cheese, and we also made a lot of other things with fresh cheeses initially, but we decided that it would be nice to have a more stable aged cheese that really represented the milk, but was really accessible to everyone. And, we thought of lots of different cheeses that might fit that category. And we thought, well, let's do a triple creme and not monkey around too much with the curd, but have it really represent what the flavor of the milk was. And it's fun because Sue was working with, Sue and Maureen actually were working with a cheesemaker that was from the Netherlands, and all he knew how to make was Gouda. So we were trying to make this cheese that was more unctuous, like a Saint Andre, and here we are making it with a Gouda style, where it's curds cut and washed, and then it's put into the mold and it ages. But as it ages from the outside toward the center. So many people think that Mount Tam should be more like a brie or a camembert, with the way that it ages and the flavor that it's supposed to be, but it actually ages from the outside inward, rather than with a brie or a camembert, it ages from the inside out. So, but what it does and what it continues to do is it really represents the milk that we use. And that's what we wanted to do from the beginning. It is our biggest selling cheese, and we're super happy that we make that. And then Sue can talk about the Red Hawk and seasonal cheeses.
Yeah, so the recipe, as Peg said, is a Gouda recipe, which means that the curds are cooked, and that expels a lot of the moisture and makes it a much denser cheese, as opposed to the camembert, which is a fresh curd. It's not cooked, so it's very tender and fragile. So the Mount Tam is tough. And I made a batch of Mount Tam and then put it into the aging room, but it was next to a Stilton that Kate Arding had brought in to sell. And the Stilton had cheese mites on it, which any honest aging room will have cheese mites. They're part of the ecology, and they bore into the rind and aerate the cheese. It's you don't want too many of them, but a few is a good thing. And you'll see that kind of powdery rind on a Stilton and some other aged cheeses. So those aren't rinds that you want to eat. Anyway, these cheese mites on the Stilton jumped onto my Mount Tam and started boring into the rind, and they basically killed the white mold. So I re-inoculated by spraying the white mold on with a solution, and instead of encouraging the growth of the white mold, it killed it even more, but also made the rind sticky and red. And I just was frustrated, so I put it back into the aging room for another week or so. And Kate, who was from Neal's Yard Dairy and running our cheese counter, said, "Did you taste this cheese that you made?" And I said, "No." She said, "This is the best cheese you've ever made." And it was that stinky, sticky cheese that I thought was not going to be edible. So we developed a system for growing the white mold and then killing it with a salty brine and attracting this wild yeast and molds from the atmosphere. And that's why Red Hawk is so unique and can't be replicated. It's wild, natural rind. And we won the grand prize in the American Cheese Contest in 2003 for that cheese. And it was one of the few in the category at that time. Other cheeses in that category are like Munster or
Windermere.
What'd you say?
Windermere.
Windermere, Epoisse. So, you know, there's many European cheeses in that category, but very few at that time in the States. But now it's one of the largest category because Americans have become very comfortable with big tasting, stinky cheeses. So that's a whole nother evolution of taste that's happened during our 25 years in this business.
You know, I just want to add one thing about the Red Hawk because it is so dependent on the environment in Point Reyes that throughout the year, it really changes its appearance. Sometimes it's really light red on the rind. Sometimes it's more orange, like a deep, a Texas orange. And then sometimes it'll be a little splotchy on the rind. And the reason is it depends on what yeast are being attracted to the rind at any given time. And that's another thing that really changes with the temperature and with the weather in Point Reyes. It almost has a common, there's almost a really level temperature area level out there, but it does variate a little bit. And those yeast, those wild things in the air that are attracting themselves to the rind, it really changes how the cheese itself looks.
Anyway, we also make 4 seasonal cheeses, and they are not triple cream. Right now it's Chimney Rock, which has a powdered mushroom and herbs on the rind, and we have a spring, a winter, and a fall. It's a way to highlight the way milk changes through the season. So we do that by making a rind treatment that's particular to that time of year. And so make sure you look for that. And I know we're running out of time, so I just want to say a few things about Ellen Strauss, who really inspired our business along with our friends in Europe, because she was from Europe, from the Netherlands, and Bill was from Germany. And they really had the old world love of local food, and did everything they could to make their farm successful and to also try to preserve agriculture as a way of life in this urban outcropping. So I think we all need to remember how important her work was, and the work of many others here in Sonoma who are preserving pasture land and open space for recreation and agriculture. We're very lucky to be here, and we couldn't have done it without those people who came before. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's good. And I just want to add on to that is not only are they doing that, but they're also really, well, especially Albert is very concerned about climate change. And he has been working on different techniques on his farm to really counteract the climate change with lots of different things that he's done, like carbon sequestering. And he's really working, this may sound funny, but he's really working on the feed that he gives the cows so they won't produce so much methane. And, you know, just things like that seem so funny, but are real issues.
Yeah. Well, you ladies, we could be entertained for another hour by you, and I, you know, so wish we were in person. I'd like to run a few questions by you now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And since we're talking about your delicious array of cheeses, this was an interesting question. In Europe, people like to end the meal with cheese, not as an aperitif. Is there a dietary reason for that?
I don't think so. I think it's just more cultural.
Okay. Another question. What is the difference between farmstead cheese and artisan cheese?
Farmstead is cheese that's made at the farm where the animals are cared for. And artisan is what we are because we don't have our own animals. So we buy from specific dairies. And artisan, you know, both of them assume that the production is small, but it's not necessarily true because there's many farmstead cheesemakers that are huge, and there's artisan cheesemakers that are tiny and all sizes. But it just speaks to, I think, a more careful way of making cheese.
Yeah, I would say that artisan cheese is not cheese that's made fully automated, where there are some production facilities that you could go into and you'll see curds that are vacuumed into, that go up 3 stories, and then they're brought down really quickly to compact the curds. Then they get set off into blocks and wrapped in plastic and aged in a box. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just one style of cheese, but that's the commodity cheese. But artisan cheese has more to do with the production, how it's made, that it's not fully automated, but there are people that are there really working with that cheese, have their hands on it. And like Sue said, farmstead is cheese that's made on the farm, but it doesn't mean that it's artisan, though most of the farmstead cheeses are artisan, but they're not all.
We got to see, you know, there's hundreds of Parmesan makers in Italy, and we got to see a farm where they were raising the animals, and every day they made 4 Parmesan, these 2 guys made 4 Parmesan cheeses. But those are added to an aging room. They're passed on to an affineur to age, and then sold with the thousands of 50-pound cheeses that are made in those small batches. So it's really, there's so many ways to manage this process, and we're interested in all of them, but except for the industrial cheeses. Not that they're bad, but it's just not what we work with.
Well, a couple other questions to run by you, and then I sadly will probably need to wrap this up. One question, and I know the answer to this, but I want you to answer it for us, is how you established the name of your company.
You want
Go
me to
ahead,
tell that,
Sue.
Meg? You want me to tell that?
I
Okay,
want you to tell your version.
we're standing in front of our barn, and we hadn't thought of the name yet, but we were already starting the construction on the rooms. And Ellen Strauss was with us, and we saw two cowgirls on horseback riding down the main road, and they hitched their horses in front of the bank to make a deposit. And Ellen said to me, "Sue, we're in the Wild West." And I said, "So we must be cowgirls?" And then from there, we became Cowgirl Creamery.
And I will say we also like Western clothes.
Yeah.
So this would be kind of a fun tip for all of our guests. What, for each of you, would be your favorite combination of cheese, fruit, and wine?
Well,
Or any other combo?
yeah, you know, I think that it's hard because it's hard to really pinpoint, but I will say that I find that Sauvignon Blancs and dry Gewürztraminers, or depending on the cheese, Pinot Noir works really well with something like our Mount Tam. I think you have to really, I like so many different cheeses. I'll have to say one of the most interesting pairing I had that was really influential in my cheese world was once I was down in an Affineurs cave, and it was like 3 stories below street level, and they were aging Comtés there. And our friend Jean Delos got out some sherry, and it was a reserve sherry, and he got a reserve Comté that was 3 years old, and he gave us a fresh piece of that, and he gave us a little teeny glass of sherry, and that was those flavors, the way they balance, because Comté has, you know, so many different flavors that you can pick up when you're eating, and the reserve sherry had that macerated flavor that was like golden raisins, but a little bit more interesting. So you had all these flavors come together in your mouth, and we had simple bread with that. And I would say that's probably one of the most remarkable tastings I've had, but I love lots of different combinations of, like, Mount Tam and Pinot Noir is fantastic. It's like eating a really delicious dessert, or something real dry like the Sauvignon Blanc with wagon wheel that we make, which is an aged round cheese that is about 15 pounds. It's a wash cheese. That works really well because then you have the balance, the flavor of the cheese kind of sets off the flavor of the wine rather than the wine setting off the flavor of the cheese. So when we do pairings, and I hope I'm not going on too long about this, but there's so many directions that you can go with. You can either try and get the accent on the wine, or you can get the accent on the cheese, or you can have a tasting where the wine and cheese create a whole new flavor in your mouth that is really exciting. Sue?
Well, I'm thinking somebody on here is stockpiling bubbles. So I'm thinking of of sparkling wine, and a really young goat cheese with sparkling wine is delightful, you know, before a meal. And another classic pairing is blue cheese with sauterne at the end of the evening, maybe with some toasted pecans or something like that. Another perfect dessert. But I agree with Peggy. There's so many variations, so many ways to try different wines with different cheeses and teas. Peggy did a tea tasting when we opened our store in DC, and that was really interesting. The different flavors of teas with the flavors of cheese.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you just got to play with it.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we had a show of hands here tonight where everyone would vote to attend a women's club event with cheese and wine tasting with the two of you, and I see a round of applause from our guests here. So we'll plan on that, and we'll do it as soon as we can. So
Sounds good.
I think with that, we should probably wrap up, and thank you for one of the loveliest evenings ever. And to let you know how much we appreciate that you're a part of our community. What a gift. I want to thank everyone for supporting the Petaluma Women's Club by joining us and for supporting the organization that we have, and to let everyone know that we're very seriously looking at a lineup of speakers for 2021. I think we're going to need to continue this format, and I encourage everyone attending tonight to communicate directly with me to give me any tips on someone you think who would make a fabulous presenter and presentation. One of the talks that we'll look forward to next year will be with Dr. Bonnie Bergen, who founded Canine Companions for Independence. And we had to postpone her talk this summer, so we'll look forward to that. And Sue and Peg, I hope you become involved with the Women's Club. We've got some great camaraderie, and I think you could help us dial up our culinary experience there. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone here tonight sincerely from the bottom of my heart for making this first ever speaker series a success, for our conclusion this year with Peg and Sue, which is just so interesting, my head's spinning. And I hope you all will join us as soon as we announce the next speakers program.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks, Colleen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Colleen.
Bye.